the perfect Black woman narrative. And I think I definitely got into my head um, of trying to be everything and not just remaining true and authentic to myself. And I think that's one of the things that was the end goal for this entire presentation. So hope you like it. Um, so I just want to start off with a quote from Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. She wrote this in 1937, almost 75 years after the end of slavery. And it's a specific time in the story where she's talking about a conversation that her grandmother had had with her. And it basically says, honey, the white man is the ruler of everything as far as I've been able to find out. Maybe it's someplace way off in the ocean where the black man is in power, but we don't know nothing but what we see. So the white man throw the load down and tell the Negro man to pick it up. He pick it up because he have to, but he don't tote it. He hands it off to his woman folk. The Negro woman is the mule of the world as far as I can see. And I've been praying for it to be different with you. Lord, Lord, Lord. Now, again, this was written in 1937. And as far as I can tell, not much has changed. Black women are still the bottom of the social totem pole in most respects. So when you look at societal's expectations or the societal hierarchy, it normally starts with white men, then you have white women, next is black men, and then finally there's black women. And it's seen in just about every aspect you could think of. When you talk about beauty standards, it's always white women that are first when it's considered what's considered uh, beautiful. Even when you look at how black beauty is presented, it's almost always when a white woman has the characteristics that would be considered beautiful on a black woman that they're given any attention. So that's seen a lot with, and I don't mean to slander them, but the Kardashians are fantastic at this. Um, when you have things like lip injections, butt injections, hairstyles, hip injections. There are all these different parts of a black woman's body that are beautiful by themselves, but they've often been shunned or they've been told that they're ghetto or they're not professional. But when a white woman does it, then all of a sudden they're transforming the narrative and they're now a part of uh, they're a part of pushing the culture forward when black women have been doing this for 30 or 40 years. Um, so then when you look at perfection, uh, there's always a standard that black women have to live up to that no human being can attain. But for some reason, black women are given this specific complex that they have to be the woman that cooks, that loves to cook, that loves to clean, that's kind to everyone, regardless of how she feels. And she's always ready to bear children. She's a constant representation of her entire race, and yet she's docile, but at the same time, she's powerful. She's willing to endure constant pain with a straight face. She puts herself last in everything, and she always smiles through her pain. She shows up for everyone, regardless of who shows up for her. She's constantly pouring from an empty cup, but she goes to church. But when it's time, she can get super freaky in the bedroom. But she doesn't curse. But she sacrifices everything, and she's politically correct when she's in public, and she's physically fit, but she waits her turn, and she's polite, and she keeps her legs crossed, and she's soft spoken. But whenever she's with a man, she takes on his identity, and her only goal is to make her man look good, while still living in a society that devalues her and whomever she chooses to partner with. So it's this collection of ideologies that no human being can live up to, and yet black women somehow still become that standard. And there is there's a history of it. Okay, so for instance, you have Harriet Tubman, of course, and Harriet Tubman rewrote the narrative of slavery, where black women were only good for handmaids, washers, cooks, sex, and childcare. And she rewrote the narrative to become a freedom fighter and a Union spy, but that's often not talked about. Then there's also Henrietta Wood, who in 18 1845, she earned her freedom because her slave master had died. But then she was sold back into slavery in 1853. And only because she had taught herself how to read and write was she able to sue the people who she was sold into slavery by. And in January of 1871, she won her court case. So she won $20,000, which would today amount to about $65,000. And so not only did Henrietta have to endure slavery, but she also had to teach herself how to read and to write. And she also had to defend herself against what can only be considered indefensible. She had to fit into this narrative of knowing how to do all of these things to overcome. The same thing can be said throughout history. So you have women who during Reconstruction is I believe it's about 8 years. It's from 1865 to 1877, where there was a small change in society where women were able, or I'm sorry, where men were able to hold political power. There was a shift in the culture where there was a semblance of equality between Black and white men and women. But even in that time, only men received the accolades. So when you look at, I believe it's Congress um, during Reconstruction, it's all Black men. And most history books only talk about Black men. And that goes through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the Harlem Renaissance, through the Civil Rights Movement, and even up until affirmative action. And it's because women are considered, or Black women, I should say, are considered, um, they're considered sort of the helpers of the movement. When you don't really get a big enough picture to understand how much Black women gave to any particular movement. So if you think about it, think about the Civil Rights Movement, for example. You have in the Black Panther Party, you have Betty Shabazz, you have Coretta Scott King, you have Angela Davis, you have Rosa Parks. And these are all women who, in one way or another, had to play the background until there was no longer an option. Okay, so for example, you have Angela Davis. Angela Davis stood up for the Black Panther Party, and she made sure that she was well versed in the law, because it wasn't enough just to want to fight for freedom. You have to know what the rights are. You have to know how to articulate it. You have to know how to translate it from layman's terms into legalese. You have to know basically all of the different ways that you will be attacked. You have to already anticipate them. And that's what Angela Davis went through. Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King, they were two phenomenal women who had to play the background to El Haj Malik El Shabazz, who was also known as Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, because there was no space in that time for them to truly live an authentic life where they could have their voices heard. And it wasn't until both of their husbands died that they were able to, make a lane for themselves. And often that's the case, because in the perfect Black woman's narrative, whenever there is a man around, you have to fight for your position. You have to fight to be heard. And I'm actually going to bring that up in a little bit. The perfect Black woman narrative also applies to children. There is the infamous story of Ruby Bridges. And Ruby Bridges had to be the perfect Black child because she was, again, carrying the entire race on her back as a child. We often see, I believe it's the Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges walking and then the two officers on either side of her. And to know that Ruby Bridges could not be a normal elementary school student, because what she was doing was so ground changing. She was the first African American child in this particular school system. And so she had to be the standard. And for Black women, that's often what we have to do. We have to be the standard, because whenever we do anything that's not considered quality, or what the public would consider, you know, standard, if you will, uh, the entire race takes the brunt of it. And I mean the entire race. Like, we have had moments where if it's one Black person that does something, there is a cultural embarrassment because we know that now we will have to carry the weight of whatever shame that person brought. And it's only recently that we're getting to the point of our own personal identity politics. But also, I just want to stick with the civil rights movement, because there's often talk about Rosa Parks, and Rosa Parks gets a lot of attention, and Rosa Parks was amazing, and I don't want there to be any confusion. I love Rosa Parks, okay? But there was also Claudette Colvin, and Claudette Colvin did not fit the narrative of the perfect Black woman. And what I mean by that is Claudette Colvin, I believe, was 17 years old, and she was pregnant. And she had also participated in refusal to give up her seat on public transportation. And the NAACP saw her story, and it was basically a conversation that ended with, we can't get enough people to back our movement if we support wedlock or having a baby out of wedlock, if we support having a baby when you're that young. So there were all of these different parts of Claudette's identity that held her back from being the example that she was trying to be. I honestly do not think that Claudette uh, gave any real consideration to whether or not she could be the poster child. She was standing up for herself. But when it came time for others to stand up for her, when it came time for Black men to stand up for her, they couldn't do it because she couldn't fit into this specific narrative. And so that's where you get Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was kind. Rosa Parks was she didn't have any children out of wedlock. Rosa Parks had a job with the NAACP already. Rosa Parks checked off all of these boxes that made her more palatable. And palatable is the status quo for the perfect Black woman narrative. And that's how we get into WAP, okay? Or as Ben Shapiro calls it, wet ass P word. And it's amazing to see how many men and older women are so disgusted by a song where women basically talk about themselves. And it's because it doesn't fit into that perfect Black woman narrative. They're not quiet. They're not docile. They're not talking about cooking and cleaning. They're not, covered up completely. They're not perfect examples to the entire world. They're not palatable. They're raw in their representation of their sexuality. And oftentimes, when that happens, there's a complete shutdown of society as a whole, because how dare you feel comfortable in yourself as a Black woman to speak about yourself in such a way? You should be in the back room supporting your man. And at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. The idea that Black women do not have autonomy for themselves for whatever reason to speak about themselves and however they please, because it's done outside of the male gaze, right? There have been plenty of songs that Black men have made that have been derogatory, that have celebrated how many women they've been with, that has celebrated what they've done to these women, that have just been ridiculous towards Black women specifically. And there was never an outcry. And it's only when Black women do it and they get public recognition that there's all of a sudden this issue or this problem. And that has to deal with, I think, the cultural shift that's taking place in a world where everyone is expected to be an India Ari. how do you fit a Meg the Stallion into that world, if you will? And it's difficult for a lot of people because now they have to look at themselves and they have to look at what do they not feel comfortable with another woman expressing about herself. So now they have to kind of dial internally into themselves and figure out, why am I not comfortable with this? And oftentimes, no one takes the time to actually have that conversation. So it's more or less I don't like it. I don't have the time to articulate why I don't like it. I just know it's wrong because I've been told it's wrong, and therefore you shouldn't like it either. When that's just simply not the case. There is autonomy in talking about yourself, in talking about what you like, in talking about uh, your sex life. Like, we have gotten to a point where it's no longer um, considered impolite to talk about politics. Politics is now a regular conversation. And politics can be, it can split families apart. It can do all of these different things to other people when they find this out about you. And it's still your own personal feelings, your own personal ideas. And sure, people can try to convince you otherwise, but it's your own belief system. And if your belief system somehow falls into the realm of your sexual proclivities, there is nothing to stop you from having that conversation. I think there's still this expectation that Black women are not supposed to have sexual feelings outside of the bedroom, if you will, because it's something that's always supposed to have been this big secret, that she's a lady in the street and a freak in the sheets. When men can talk about all of the things that they do, but the second the woman does it, there's an issue. The last thing that I want to talk about is the societal rules of the white gaze, and that's GAZE. And those are the things that rule the media and in many aspects the Western world. It's it's what's created by the societal narrative that a Black woman must fit into a specific box in order to be considered quality. It's the removal of humanity and personality and lived experiences of Black women. It's why Claudette Colvin's story was all but erased from the history books in order for Rosa Parks to thrive, or why the WAP video is seen as a disrespectful representation of women, and yet critics of the song often have their own record catalog where they are also disrespectful to women. The last thing that I want to talk about is women's planning. And it is a new concept to me because I have only heard of mansplaining. And that is, of course, when a man explains something to a woman in a way that he feels like she would understand it better, you know? So now I've taken to women's planning. And women's planning is basically the same concept as mansplaining, but just flip it on its head. And I have learned very quickly that men do not like women's planning. They feel as though you talk down to them or you talk over them. And I've used it sort of as a social experiment with my boyfriend, and he is very vocal about the fact that he feels as though I'm talking over him, or that I'm not understanding where he's coming from because I keep trying to explain it my own way. And I just think it's hilarious because for the past 5 years, I've dealt with mansplaining. And so I encourage every woman here, and if there are any men in here, I encourage you to tell the lovely women in your life to womansplain. It is incredible how freeing it is. And I mean freeing. Like, to explain something back to a man and to watch their face look at you and they're just like, I thought I explained it well enough the first time. It's just, I encourage every woman to do it. But so that is my presentation on the perfect Black woman narrative. At the end of the day, the perfect Black woman narrative does not exist. It literally only resides in the minds of anyone who is not a Black woman. The idea that you can build a human being to fit and check off every single box, and that every other human being has those same check boxes, is just, it's ridiculous, it's absurd, and it's something that we have to let go of this idea of perfection, because it doesn't exist and it can't be the same from one person to another. And so whenever anyone tries to put you into a box, I encourage you to figure out, why are they trying to put you into that box? And number two, how do you feel about this relationship that you have? Are you comfortable with yourself being there? Would you put yourself there? I think is the question that you have to ask yourself at the end of the day when it comes to anyone's interpretation of you. Thank you.
Yay! I'm clapping for everybody. Thank you so much, Ruth. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm impressed with how much history you packed into such a short little presentation. But it's really helped me see, like this trajectory, right, of how this women are, Black women are in this double bind. And one of the things that always strikes me when we talk about this is how, as much as we talk about patriarchy, right, we also have white supremacy acting on our lives. And then there's also like women, of all races can be complicit in patriarchy. The people of color can be complicit in white supremacy sometimes too, right? And it's like, why is it that we can talk about these big systems of oppression, but then sometimes we interact with people in ways that reproduce it, right? Like, why is it that we do that? So anyway, this was fantastic. I'm going to open the floor to other folks. Does anyone have any questions for Ruth about the presentation, about current work?
I have a question.
Yeah.
A question for Ruth. You've had such a rich professional life, and I was wondering how you probably, I don't know how to word this the best way, but how did you overcome your racial identity, perhaps prejudices, in your professional life? And what do you think women can do to support you or women of color in professional environments?
Okay, so here's the really interesting story. So I grew up in PG County in Maryland, and it is an all Black community. It's one of the, I want to say, one of three Black counties in the United States where like everyone is Black. And so growing up, I got to try on all these different versions of my Blackness. And so in high school, I would float to all of the different groups. So I would hang out with the punk rock kids. I would hang out with the jocks. I would hang out with the nerds, quote unquote. I would hang out with the kids who were into anime. I would hang out with the writers. Like, there were all of these different groups. And so I kind of developed my own identity based on a collection of all of these different things. And it's kind of interesting because I love the show Recess. And Recess has it has Spinelli, it had Gretchen, it had TJ. And I was able to find myself in each of those characters. And so I could identify with who I was feeling like based on how I identified with those characters. And so that kind of helped me to pick apart the different parts of my racial identity. Now, when I moved to Toledo, I moved here about 7 years ago, and I found out I was Black. Like I was, for the first time, a minority. And I realized this when I was in I think it was like a Black history or a Black arts class. And one of my white classmates tried to argue me down about affirmative action. And I was just like, oh, this is what we're doing. Okay. Thanks, but no thanks. I'll talk to you later. But it manifested, like it reinvigorated, I guess you can say, my Blackness when I found other people who were also in this fight. And they weren't always necessarily Black people, but they were people who recognized the importance of, and this was before like Black Lives Matter became a thing, they recognized the importance of community. They recognized the importance of sticking up for yourself and giving others space to stick up for themselves. And we became, it was like a found family, if you will, where we all kind of took on each other's battles in order to show that we were all in the same fight together. And so I think that that's what's most important, is when you have to work towards something that would be considered racial equality, it's important to find people who are willing to put themselves on the line, who are willing to have some skin in the game and willing to risk something in order for someone else to be successful. And oftentimes I came at it as the one who was at, like I said, the bottom of the totem pole. So I was often lifting others constantly. And it wasn't until someone turned around and said, "What do you need?" And having someone who can help me to articulate the frustration that I was feeling, the separation that I may have been going through of constantly helping others in order to turn around and help me. I think that was super important. I hope that answered your question.
I've got a question from Carrie Peralta here. She says, "Thanks, Ruth. Could you talk more about your thoughts on how the media portrays or doesn't portray Black women artists, particularly our local media, and how it covered activism this past summer?"
Okay, so the local media has some really good people who work for it. I will personally give a shout out to, oh gosh, of course I can't remember her name, Roxanne Elias and Emma Henderson. I think those are two people who have been in constant contact with myself and other members of CSRN, to kind of give us a platform. But I think for the most part, the local media has its own issues, if you will. There are expectations, there's deadlines, there's all of these other excuses I could give you that basically boil down to activism doesn't sell. Like however you want to word it, activism doesn't sell. It's not glitzy, it's not glamorous. There's the great quote, "If it bleeds, it leads." That's the main reason why the protest downtown got so much attention, is because of the violence that came out of the police interacting. If that weren't the case, then it would have been a one-day thing. Like, definitely, because we've had protests before, and granted they weren't as big, but also they did not end in violence, so there was no need to give it any more attention. But that's why I think it's super important to create your own media, to put yourself in the driver's seat, if you will, of the narrative, because that's the only way that you can get the stories told that you want to be told in a way that's not biased. I think it's very difficult to be involved in activism and not be biased, because of just the general nature of things, of being on the side of history that you know is right. And I mean, like intrinsically, you know that it's the right side of history. So of course, whatever you present is going to be skewed in that version. And no one's saying that's wrong, because literally Fox News exists. And there's a skew for every story. So there's nothing to stop us as individuals from creating our own stories. And that's why I did create Black Men Unfiltered, because I knew that at that particular time in history, the only narrative that was out there was that Black men are toxic and it's toxic masculinity. And it's like, but there's a man underneath there. Like there's a whole human being that exists. And if that story isn't told, then I can't wait on the news to talk about it. Now, when you say the media portrays or doesn't portray Black women activists, there's also a thing to be said for burnout. And I don't know if you're talking about me specifically or anything in particular, but there is there is constant burnout when it comes to activism because you have to have self-care. Self-care is the most important thing you can possibly do in uh in any type of work, but especially in activism work, because you're putting so much of yourself out into the world that if you're not recharging yourself, then of course you're going to pour from an empty cup. And so when it comes to things like interviews and stuff like that, sometimes it is easier to let someone else speak because for myself, I know that number one, I trust what the other person is going to say. And number two, I'm just tired. And whenever you do an interview like that, of course you go and you look at the comments. And so now the comments are something else that's taking from you, and you're taking in. And I think I'm a I don't know how you would identify it astrologically, but like I take in people's energy constantly. And so to put myself out there constantly as an activist, to be on the news constantly as the spokesperson, and then to read the comments constantly, just as a consumer, that's a lot of give and take. And if I'm not pouring back into myself, I'm going to burn out. And I think it's super, super important that you keep in touch with yourself. Because my mother used to tell me when I was younger, don't let your body have a fool for a boss. And most of the times when it comes to the news, I already know I'm going to be too tired and I'm not going to get my words right. And I'm going to pick over what I said. And it's easier to get it right than to just simply do it. So that's what I'll say about that.
Thanks. These are great questions. Anyone else? We've still got some time here.
Come on, come on, come on.
I always have questions, but I've been talking a lot, so step back. Okay, I'll jump in with a question. Hopefully someone else will, they're thinking on it. So I'm really curious about your your projects to defund the police. So I want to hear about that. But I also want to know, so is Refund Toledo linked to defund the police?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
tell us more.
Okay. So I'm so glad you asked. All right. So the Toledo Police Department, through taxes, brings in roughly $84 million. And there is nothing to show that neighborhoods are safer because there are so many police. Neighborhoods are actually safer because of access to resources. Oftentimes, police only show up after violence happens, so they are actually reactionary instead of precautions. Now, the goal to defund the police is to take half of the police budget, and this is only from taxes because there's still like a remaining, I think, $7.5 million that comes from different funds and grants and things like that. So you take that $84 million, you split it in half. So now the police budget is roughly, so you take 40, 42, 7. So it's like $50 million for the police budget. 44 million. That 44 million gets spread across all of the other departments. So things like neighborhoods and neighborhood development. Normally,
No, Ruth, come back. It was so good. Okay, let's hang on a minute if you can. Let's see if we can get her back. Okay, Ruth.
hello? Hello?
Wait, hold on, Ruth. you're cutting out. I think it's your video is taking up too much bandwidth. So we caught you on like, I know you were on a roll. So it cut out right around when you were saying that you would take like this 44 million and spread it across the other departments. So yeah, let's keep your video off for a minute, and then you can finish telling us about your awesome Refund Toledo, Defund the Police project.
Okay, but you can hear me now?
Good.
Okay, so you would take $44 million and you would spread it across all of the other departments. So for example, for every dollar that the city of Toledo brings in from taxes, 33 cents goes to the police department and only 3 cents goes to neighborhood and development. And the youth commission, which used to be responsible for all of the projects that took place in the city dealing with teenagers and preteens, they completely cut that budget. So there's absolutely no one working in that office now. So with the defund the police, you would defund, slash that budget in half, and refund it to all of the other departments that have been cut over the past 5 or so years. And basically, it creates spaces for resources to be poured back into communities. So now you can have space for mental health workers. You can have training for social workers. You can have it so that child welfare isn't seen as the only option for families who are struggling. So that children aren't being taken away from their homes where it's a lack of resources and not necessarily physical violence. You can have access to grocery stores. We can bring grocery stores back into the neighborhood, because I know where I live, we used to have a Save-A-Lot right up the street, and then they completely got rid of it. And now there's no grocery stores. All we have are these corner stores that have like a 200% markup on things like bananas. And there is a need for the resources to be put back into our communities, because slowly but surely Toledo is turning into a police state because of the belief that police are the only way to solve crime, when that's not the case. Because even looking in the police budget, there were 2 positions, and they basically were the people who came onto whatever the crime scene was, and they collected evidence and they took it, I guess, to the lab. So I think if you think like CSI, it would be the goth girl. They completely got rid of that position though. So now there's a question of, do they look through their evidence now, or is that no longer a part of it? Or is there someone who's working part-time in that position who doesn't have as much training to make sure that what's being done is being done properly? So there's all these shortcuts, and yet crime is still increasing. And so it's proving that just because you have more police doesn't make your neighborhood any safer. So now we're looking at completely turning the car around and saying, okay, we are no longer going to continue to fund an inept police department. We are now going to look to fund all of the resources that these communities need that are readily available in well-to-do communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Someone in the chat box says that they really appreciate you pointing out that the police aren't necessarily there to prevent, or they're not having the preventative impact that citizens often think they are.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's really an important point. All right. So we have a few minutes left. Could you share with us like one quick way, not quick, but one way that folks who are on this call could get involved in the community to uplift Black women?
Okay, so I have been in the early planning stages, and this is just selfless promotion. I have been in the early planning stages of recreating Ntozake Nshange's work of poetry for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, and doing it with Black women as sort of a play. So if anyone would like to help finance that, you can donate to my Cash App, which is the $ Black Miss Frizzle. But also, if you, I think an even easier thing to do would be just to read. Just read as much as you can. There are so many amazing Black women writers about multiple subjects. So whatever your major is, whatever you're interested in, seek out Black women's perspectives on that topic. Most of my work, of course, is in social justice and in education, but Black women have touched just about every area of American culture. And so just make it an active effort to seek out Black women's perspectives. There's an Instagram hashtag that's called, I think it's Cite a Black Woman Sunday. And it's just hashtag Cite a Black Woman Sunday. And that hashtag, it basically just gives you multiple resources that are done specifically for Black women. And it's just a great resource that you can use. So yeah, read about Black women's perspectives and donate to Cash App Black Miss Frizzle. And also the main thing that I want everyone to take away from this is to use your privilege. Use your privilege to make space for Black women, and use it so that if Black women are not in the room, that you make it you make it as though they are there. So you stand up for them the same way that you would if they were there, but then also you invite them into the room. So yeah, that's
awesome. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, Black Miss Frizzle. So MISS or MS?
it's actually MZ. Sorry, I'll add it to the chat.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, you're gonna add it to the chat. Sweet. Okay. So thank you so much. This was fantastic. I am also put the link to our survey that we do after every program to figure out the impact we're having and what else you want to see from us. So if you've got a minute, folks, please do fill that out. And I've been taking notes here, Ruth, so I'm gonna shout this out as well on our social media. I might follow up with a couple more specifics about your project. So
Okay.
we can expand that reach. Anyone have any parting questions, thoughts, comments? Should we unmute to give a big round of applause? Yes, yes, we should. Okay, everybody unmute and let's clap. This was awesome, Ruth. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch with you to follow up on some stuff. Also, gotta get that paperwork to get you paid. I want everyone to know, like, right now, one of the things the Eberly Center is doing is paying Black women for their time, right? Paying women for their time, especially Black women for their time. So if you know anybody in the community who's doing amazing work and you think that we should put a spotlight on them, please reach out to us at the Eberly Center and we will look them up. Okay, take care, everyone. Thanks again, Ruth. Bye. Thank you.